Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley, and as always, I'm so deeply grateful you're here. And I am incredibly excited to share with you today an interview that I recently had the privilege of conducting with a sex and intimacy coach named Irene Fehr. Irene is on a mission to dispel dangerous myths about women's libido that really causes a tremendous amount of heartache and broken dreams and really a lot of self-doubt in women. And Irene, through her work, really helps to bring couples closer together through this very beautiful and intimate part of their relationship. Irene is no stranger to her clients' issues because she herself has recovered from the all too common story of a happy marriage turned sexless. And she actually has the direct experience of having lost her libido at a very young age before turning 30. So we cover a lot of ground in this interview, including what happens in a long-term relationship that affects women's interest in sex. We talk about the things that women are actually starving for in terms of nutrients that they need to replenish in order to feel sexual in a long-term relationship. We talk about partnership in the bedroom in terms of how we can communicate with our partners in terms of what we need and what brings us pleasure. And of course, we talk about these 4 myths that kill women's libidos and make women feel sexually broken when they're absolutely not. So if you are someone who is in a sexless marriage, or you are in a relationship where you are not having the type of physical intimacy that you would like, do not miss this episode. Let's dive right into it. Here we go. All right. So Irene Fehr, welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we are talking all things intimacy and sex today, which I know is a really relevant conversation for my audience. And of course, I think the greatest starting place is how you got into this work. I would love to hear your story.
Well, my story, unfortunately, was a sad one, at least the beginning of it. Today, I work with couples and women around the issues of low libido and sexless marriages, and that was my story. I met my now ex-husband, but when I met him, it was love at first sight. It was a beautiful relationship. Everything was great. And then when our relationship deepened, our sex life changed, and I eventually lost my libido. It was gradual, but it was also it happened pretty quickly over just a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And so we went from this happy, balancing, alive couple and me being very open sexually to being completely shut down, not wanting sex, not wanting to have sex with a man that I loved.
You were fairly young when this happened.
I was very young. So I was 26 when we met. So by the age of 29, I was in a sexless marriage.
Yeah. And so what was your gateway into resolving that? Like, how did you start to work through that with yourself and in your relationship?
Well, the unfortunate part was that the marriage had to end, mm-hmm. and we really drew apart. It wasn't really the sexless piece that made us fall apart, but the loss of connection, not being able to talk about this huge thing, this elephant in the room. And of course, my own self-esteem tanking and feeling like I was sexually broken. Of course, I couldn't show up fully in the relationship. So the end of the relationship was devastating for me. Again, it was such a huge hit on me emotionally. The divorce itself was very hard. And then there were a couple of years afterwards where I was really shut down. I had resigned myself to being asexual, to really not being able to enjoy sex, not wanting sex, and disconnected really from life. I remember those times as being really gray, like there was no color in life for me. So I went through that period of about 5 years from the end of the relationship and the years afterwards. And at some point after that, I was so heavily in a depression. I'm usually an alive person. I have a lot of energy. I have a lot of color to me in my life. But again, everything just felt so gray and so difficult and so hard. And I had a terrible year of everything falling apart and feeling like I'm going through a nervous breakdown. But thankfully, it was a spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
I love how Brene Brown says that, right? It was a nervous breakdown that was actually a spiritual awakening. And that was really what happened to me.
Yeah.
And during that awakening, I woke up to this idea that, no, I do want to feel sexual again. At some level, I knew I wasn't broken. At some level, I knew that what I wanted was possible, which was to enjoy sex, to feel that aliveness in my body. And so I went on a search to find that. And I started to work with sex coaches and life coaches and do lots of different trainings and programs. And very quickly in that journey, because my body started to come alive and color flooded back into my life, and I just felt so unstoppable that I knew I wanted to do this. I knew I wanted to do this for women, because also when I started speaking up about my own story, other women started to crawl out of the woodwork and say, this happened to me too. And this happened to me. And I totally relate. I had pain during intercourse. Was not able to orgasm, lost my libido, sexless marriage. This touches so many women's lives. Mm-hmm. This is almost predictable in a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
And so when I started hearing these stories, like I said, I knew this is the work that I wanted to do. I knew that I needed to get this information out to women that were not broken, and the steps to reclaim that aliveness in our bodies and find that sexual energy and connect to our partners. Because again, I lost my marriage indirectly because of that, because it was the piece that broke us up that we couldn't really talk about and connect.
Yeah. What I hear you speaking to is, number one, there's like just such a huge cost to a sexless marriage, not just in the relationship itself, but to you as a person. You know, I hear you saying you lost your color and you started to slide into this depression, and there was all this self-doubt. And so we start spending so much time on that idea, which I think is really a myth that you're going to speak to here, that we are broken in some way. And the other thing that I think we come up against so often is that it's not a normalized conversation. It's a lot like menopause in that these are topics that we don't typically share with our friends and family. Like, we don't know the spaces and places to go to have these conversations. So again, so grateful you're here to sort of help normalize it for us. So let's talk about, I know you talk about 4 myths that really kill women's libidos. Yes, or these ideas around women's libidos. Let's dive into that. Let's talk about those myths.
So before we go into those myths, I want to talk a little bit about what happens in the beginning of a relationship and what happens as the relationship deepens and becomes a long-term relationship. Because the myths very much speak to, again, what happens in this long-term range. Mm-hmm. Why is it that so many women feel super sexual in the beginning of their relationship, but then eventually come to this conclusion that there's something wrong with them? This is the pattern that I experienced, that I see so many women go through. And that's going to set the context for the myths.
Of course.
So whether you are 20 or 40 or 60, in the beginning of a relationship, we all go through this super special phase where we are really, we're getting to know each other, we're into each other, and something amazing happens, something that's really fruitful for women's libido and sexuality. Number one, we're getting attention from our partners all the time. Nowadays they're texting us. Before, it used to be that they're sending love letters, right? They're thinking about us. They're telling us that they're thinking about us. They're sending us flowers. They're taking us out to dinner. There's this constant flood of attention, quality attention that feels really, really good.
Yes.
There's also open and honest conversations, which means there's emotional connection and emotional intimacy. Again, in the beginning of the relationship, you spend hours talking about your dreams and desires and what's important to you. All of this is connecting heart to heart and really creating that bond and that connection. Super important for women. This is just like a huge aphrodisiac. There's also lots of touch, goalless touch, just exploring each other's bodies, making out for hours, holding hands, nuzzling up to each other, all these things. So there's this affectionate and sexy, playful touch that's happening a lot. And there's space to make love the whole weekend. You don't have to run somewhere, go somewhere, take care of kids, dogs, or anything. Somehow we find dog sitters and everyone else when we're in that dating stage. So everything is taken care of and we can just be with each other. And the last thing is, in the beginning of a relationship, we as women usually have lots of time to ourselves, time to preen, time to relax, time to just do whatever we want to do.
Yeah.
So we don't realize these things are happening in the beginning of the relationship, but these are super important. These are the key elements for women's libido.
Well, and it's interesting because these are the very things that when I coach clients, they're rumbling with so deeply. They don't have time. They're not connecting. They aren't, it's maybe with their partner, it is really just about sex and there's not that physical play and physical touch. So it makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. So what happens in the beginning of a relationship is almost like false advertising. There's all these elements that turn a woman on, that make her spontaneous, make her be the initiator and enjoy sex. Fast forward a couple of years and all of those go missing. No time, no spaciousness, no touch, feeling like strangers to each other, kind of passing each other in the hallway as you're talking about who picks up the kids or who does this and that, and feeling really disconnected, no attention, nothing. And so women end up being starved of the very nutrients that had them be attracted to their partners, that had them fall in love, and that had them be sexually open in the beginning.
Yeah.
And so from all of this is where the myths come from. We don't realize that this is happening. And so we come up with these myths and conclusions that lead us down the road of there's something wrong with us. We are broken sexually because we have lost interest. Because look, we're with a man we love. Why shouldn't we want to have sex?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. When you describe that, I always, say to my husband, we're like ships passing in the night, two self-employed people raising a child, sort of in just the throes of all the responsibility of life, that it's really easy to lose that connection and to not make time for it. And so I'm so excited that you're going to help sort of rekindle all of that for us here, making that time.
Yes. So even realizing that you need this time, I've seen this create such a sense of relief for so many women because, everyone knows we're out of time. Life is busy. Life takes over. But realizing that you're not broken sexually, that it's actually these nutrients are missing out of your life is super empowering for women.
It is, because when I hear like a nutrient deficit, I can replace that deficit, right? I can fill it up.
Exactly.
I can work through that.
Exactly. So let me go through the 4 myths and then we can talk about then what can we do, right?
Sure.
What are the solutions to this?
Great.
So the 4 myths are, one is that women's sexual desire should be spontaneous, which comes from really comparing ourselves to men. Men's sexual desire, generally speaking, is spontaneous. They have a thought of their partner and they can get an erection within just a matter of minutes and be ready for sex. They can see a billboard or think of their partner or anything. And again, that can happen within a matter of minutes. For women, we have what's called responsive sexual desire. And what our sexual desire is responding to is all those elements that I just mentioned: attention, touch, emotional connection, and a space of our own time, right? So in a long-term relationship, women put all this pressure on themselves to be like their male partners, to just be spontaneous because, look, he's ready. He wants to have sex with me. Why am I not?
Yeah.
And this pressure itself is a libido killer. Yeah. Once you feel like you have to be this quick and on and you can't, you feel powerless. And of course, again, self-esteem goes down and a woman starts to feel sexually broken.
I think along those lines too, it's sometimes because we have that expectation, we also start treating sex like a job, right? Like, let's just have sex and be done with it. So, they just get their fix, which of course doesn't build intimacy. It's not building the relationship.
Absolutely. And it creates diminishing returns where when you do it a couple of times, you start to build resentment. So the next time you do it, it feels more like a chore, more like a job. You start to resent your partner even more. And the sex doesn't feel good. Sure, you might get an orgasm out of it, but it feels mechanical. It feels kind of just, it's not the kind of sex where you feel connected and open and pleasurable and pleasured and all those things. So you just want less of it then, again, and just this downward spiral.
Makes sense.
So this myth that our sexual desire should be spontaneous is incredibly damaging. And again, we miss out on the nutrients that we need to replenish.
Mm-hmm.
The second piece is, speaking about nutrients, is just our normal natural lives and the kind of the zeitgeist that we live in today, which is we're super women and we're supposed to do it all, do it for everyone, do it perfectly, then crawl into bed absolutely exhausted and still be able to do sex, right, at 11 o'clock at night.
Right.
And this is ludicrous. And, I think most women, really, when they catch themselves saying it, they realize that this is crazy, yet this is the common expectation. Mm-hmm. And again, when we think this way, we set ourselves up for failure. We fail at delivering and our self-esteem goes down.
Yeah.
And the reality is we can't do it all, period. We can't do it all perfectly. And if we run out of energy by the evening, you won't have sexual energy then to spend and to share. That's just math, right? Just math and energy accounting. So this is it's a myth, but it's also, again, the reality of so many women. And we really have to change the conversation to, what do you need to cultivate sexual energy? And where do you need to cut down on things that drain your energy so that, again, your sexual energy has space and can be cultivated? Yeah. That's super important.
Because our energy is a limited resource. We talk about this a lot on the podcast and within the community, and always, reassessing what is a priority for you, because we have to make sex a priority, right? If we want to improve our sexual lives, we have to be thinking about it. We have to be creating time and attention for it. And that often requires that we trim the fat in other areas of our life. How am I going to conserve time and energy for this somewhere in my day, somewhere in my week? And that is an exercise in and of itself for a lot of women, because everything feels so important.
Absolutely. And, this is where I always bring in the topic of partners and partnership, that sex and libido in a long-term relationship is not, especially if the woman is struggling with it, it's not her problem. It's a couple issue. And so creating an infrastructure that supports the woman to have spaciousness to connect, to get aroused, to take time to come alive sexually, that has to be budgeted in with the whole family in mind, like the whole relationship. Yeah. There needs to be infrastructure, rather than what I see a lot of, unfortunately, is the male partner telling his wife, go fix yourself. You should, if you don't want sex, you need to go fix yourself so that you show up sexually. And that doesn't work that way. Yeah. There needs to be a partnership in creating a way of life that supports women's libido.
Yeah. Will you give us some examples of that, just in terms of like the infrastructure, like some things that would help to support that type of thing?
Absolutely. So the biggest one is spaciousness, having time for the woman to just do whatever she wants, right? We schedule our days to the minute. Oh, yeah. And we fill our days up. And there's, of course, actual real responsibilities that we have with work and children and all different things. And so it's creating an infrastructure where you carve out time. So, for example, for younger couples, when you have children, it's carving out child support time, blocks of time, not just 15 minutes here and there, but a half a day, maybe even a weekend where she can go away to replenish herself, where she can do things on a regular basis, pleasure practices. This is something that I teach my clients. Mm-hmm. Infusing your day with pleasure every day. This is an essential nutrient.
Yes.
And having those responsibilities taken care of, whether by the partner or by outsourcing some of that to family, to friends, to the community. Yeah. So that's one of them. And another one is, for sure, setting aside time for the couple to be lovers every day. Mm-hmm. This is, again, another way of saying what I said earlier, the shift between the beginnings of a relationship and what happens later, is that in the beginning, they have time to be lovers. Afterward, later on, they are just roommates, business partners, household partners. And that time to be lovers doesn't happen. So it's about, again, creating this infrastructure that supports the couple to not have responsibilities, to have time for each other, to just listen to each other, look in each other's eyes, not talk about practicalities, but to really listen and hear what the other person has to say, to talk about dreams, and to do things like make out and not have to rush out the door to go do something, or to spend the weekend and, again, not feel the pressure to do something. Those kind of things have to be budgeted, taken into consideration, prioritized, and done intentionally.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting, isn't it? Because as humans, we're always evolving. We're always changing. I'm not the same person I was 5 or 10 years ago. My husband certainly isn't. And what I hear in what you just shared with us is, not only do we need to be taking time to get to know ourselves and our own evolution and what brings us pleasure at this age and stage of life, but then we also need to be making that time to share that with our partner, not letting them know who we are at this age and stage, but also getting to know who they are.
Absolutely. And exactly what you said, we're constantly changing. And if we're moving at 1,000 miles an hour past each other, we miss that. And that creates disconnect. That creates a sense of you don't know each other anymore. You're sleeping with each other in the same bed, but you're there like strangers. And so, connecting, really like syncing up with each other during these times as lovers is incredibly important. And understanding like what the body needs, what the physical needs are, what kind of touch feels good now as opposed to 10 years ago versus now, right? Checking in with each other around touch and, again, pleasure.
And being able to communicate that, right? So knowing what type of touch is enjoyable to us or brings us pleasure, and then being able to have those conversations, which for people who've never had those conversations, I would imagine can feel really difficult. But we have to have those conversations so our partner knows what brings us pleasure.
Absolutely. And if you don't know, which is true for most of us, in a sense, if you're constantly changing, you don't know what is coming up, right? You don't know how you're evolving. The key is to have space where you can say, hey, I don't know what I want, but can we play and explore what it is? Can we try this? Can we try that? And have that safe space to just play, really, to try.
Two massive words, play and explore, because these are two words that I think as children, of course, we understood the value of. I mean, it's not even something we have to be taught. It's just our nature as children. And then, of course, as we go through the timeline of growing up, we somehow start to categorize those things as luxuries or maybe frivolous or sort of a waste of time because we're not being productive. And it's so interesting because we have so many conversations around this. And it's so interesting to watch women wrestle with giving themselves the permission to just play and explore, not just in bed, but in their life in general.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's such a link between playfulness and aliveness and sexuality, because libido is life force. And life force is not just something that comes alive when you're sexual. It's through play, through exploration, through, the Buddhist term, having new eyes. It's like, oh, what am I looking at? Right? Like the way puppies or children look, and they're like, wow, I've never seen this. And having that mindset when you look at your partner and when you look at yourself, it's like, wow, who is this person in front of me? What do they want? What do they love? And having that lightness about this. Yeah, that openness.
I hear a lot of curiosity in that, right? Being really curious about this person you've chosen to share your life with, and being curious about yourself. And to use the word you used early in the interview today, it helps to bring color back into your life and back into your relationship. And I love that, because to me, that color speaks so much of vitality and life force.
Yeah, color and also newness, because there's so much talk out there of needing newness in your sex life, new positions, new ways of twisting your body into a pretzel, new toys, opening up the relationship, all these different things. But the thing is, when you're truly curious with each other, there's so much newness you will discover in each other. Because like you said, we're constantly changing. There are depths of us that our partners cannot even know, even if they had all the time in the world to get to know us, right? And our bodies want new things. Things feel differently, and new things bring pleasure. So we don't need to look for newness in these external things. The newness actually comes from that connection and that curiosity when we look at each other.
Yeah, which offers such a layer of intimacy, right?
Absolutely.
And brings that to the relationship, because I think what we all want is not just a marriage. We want an intimate relationship with another person.
Yeah. And we want to see and be seen, and to get to be known. And that adds a whole level of richness to sex, which of course could be just a physical act, or it could be this beautiful act of connection and intimacy and openness with each other.
I love that. Do we have 2 more myths? Yes.
Yes, we have 2 more myths. And I'll go really quickly through them, because in a way they show a different aspect of the things that I talked about.
Okay.
So the third one is, I should want to have sex with a man I love. Again, despite the fact that we don't see each other, we don't talk.
And should always feel so great.
Exactly. And should always feel so great. Yeah. And again, this is the pressure that we put on ourselves as women without realizing that we're missing and starving of these essential nutrients, everything that I talked about earlier. And then the fourth one is, we tend to look at men and compare ourselves to them, because again, for most men, sex is fairly easy. That arousal is easy. It happens quickly, and they're available for sex. And we look at ourselves and by the way, I have a free video series where I map this out. I get very geeky about this. And
we'll talk about that at the end, so we know people can head on over there.
Yep. So in the graphs, I show how, the men's journey is so easy and linear, and women's journey is so confusing. And that has women, again, feel like we're broken. There's something wrong with us. Why can't we be as easy as men? I have so many women coming to me and saying, like, I take too long to orgasm. He can orgasm in 3 minutes. It takes me like an hour. And around that, I say, if you want to orgasm in 3 minutes, you're going to lose out on so much pleasure and relaxation and arousal. Number one, you might get it, but you most likely you will fail at this, because it's not going to actually feel good. But again, our culture and just like the way we think about things, we compare ourselves to men and we come out broken. And that's really unfair to women. This is more of also a societal issue. We have to start talking about women's libido, not as compared to men, but as a whole different beast, a whole different thing. And that requires different nutrients, and that functions differently, and that has beautiful gifts when it's fed, when it's nourished, when it's allowed to be itself.
Well, and so many of the nutrients you've shared here so far, the play, the exploration, the connection, none of that happens in 3 minutes. I mean, it happens over a longer period of time. So I want to play longer.
Exactly. And also another general myth about women's libido, or maybe not a myth, but a misunderstanding, or maybe it's something that we don't really actually realize, is that women's libido is like an oven. Once it heats up, it stays hot, but it takes time to heat it up. Men's libido is like a microwave. You punch in the time and it goes right to the highest heat.
Never heard
but
that.
When they're done,
yeah,
they go to zero. And so this is where we as women miss out on so much. And definitely the men that we're with miss out on so much of what's available when we take time to warm up the body, the connection, the playfulness, and then keep it going. Wow. Not only is the sex amazing once you're in that place of where the heat is maintained, but also the relationship is lubricated. Things feel easy. We feel unstoppable. I mean, everything switches and changes in life.
Yeah, I love that you just mentioned that, because as you're talking, I'm thinking, yeah, this is how we bolster our confidence. We start feeling we're taking our power back.
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
a lot of ways. So yeah. Let's speak to the women who are listening who really feel that they do have a sexless marriage. You know, that they feel disconnected from their partner. They rarely, if ever, have sex. Where do they start to fuel the fire for their libido, start to heat up their libido again? Because I would imagine many people listening are like, this sounds great, but I don't know, it feels hopeless for me.
Well, there's a couple of ways of approaching this. Okay. Certainly, there's things that a woman can do for herself. And the biggest and most impactful thing in this area is to reconnect to pleasure. And I'm not talking about sexual pleasure. I'm talking about daily doses of pleasure, things that feel good to you, that have your body relax. For example, it's taking a shower and not doing it so quickly, washing your hair and running out to do something, but actually taking 5, 10, whatever, 15 minutes that you take to enjoy the water, to feel the warmth on your skin, to feel the lather from the soap on your fingers, to just enjoy it. To sit down and have lunch for yourself, again, not while you're working or doing something, but just to reclaim that as a sensual experience rather than, again, just shoveling food in or doing something else while you're eating.
This is perfectly timed because last weekend's podcast was all about the gifts of slow. So yes. The power in slowing down and how much that affords us and what a nutrient in and of itself slowing down is. Yeah. And I love that you're speaking directly to this, that it's in the slowing down that we rediscover pleasure. We allow pleasure.
Exactly. And we then have time to also receive it. We can't receive pleasure if we're moving 1,000 miles an hour. Just like you can't see flowers if the train is moving at 1,000 miles an hour. You have to slow down so that actually what is happening, you get to receive it. You get the nourishment in, right? The enjoyment, the kind of that feeling of like, ooh, this feels really good. I want to bask here. We have to allow time and spaciousness for that. So
what
super
about
important.
The woman who has a hard time allowing herself pleasure? Because some women are so stuck in this cycle of it's always about production. It's always about to do. If they start to feel good, it's almost like they go into this frame of mind where they're waiting for the shoe to drop. Right. So they kind of go into this catastrophic thinking. So how do we begin to allow pleasure if we have been in this space of not allowing it for so long?
So start small.
Start small.
Tiny. So it may not be taking the time to enjoy the whole shower, but just taking a moment while you're in it to feel, oh, wow, that warm water feels really good on my skin. Yeah. Or a moment while you're eating chocolate and just to linger, be like, wow, I love how that tastes in my mouth. And start really small. So I have a training background in trauma. And one of the things that we utilize in trauma is slowing down, that this is a very powerful anti-trauma technique, because what happens with trauma, which is where a lot of these beliefs come from, like I have to work, I can't slow down, or something will happen, that comes from trauma. And with trauma, you don't want to do too much too quickly, because that's going to kick you back into that kind of, freeze, and then fear takes over and you go in the opposite direction. But when you do it in these small doses, the body can get a feel of pleasure, but without triggering that fight or flight reflex. So give yourself those small moments because they're bearable, or you can handle them in small doses, and then start to increase the dose. And that's really important. Build up your capacity to be with pleasure and not go into these self-limited beliefs or doubts, or again, just pure fight or flight.
I love it. So don't overwhelm the brain.
Exactly.
Just slow and easy.
Exactly. Yep. Don't overwhelm the brain or the body. The fight or flight happens in the body. That grasping, that gripping happens in the body. So see what you can do while you're relaxed and not trigger that response.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And just take it slow. And of course, working with someone who has a background in opening up to pleasure and trauma, and it doesn't have to be huge trauma. It's not big T trauma that something had to happen, but so much of our lives is traumatic. Disappointments and moments where we felt like we were unsupported or abandoned or didn't get our needs met. Those are traumatic enough.
Yeah, there's those micro traumas, right? They compound over time. And they definitely affect our nervous system.
Yeah. And of course, they show up in relationships, because trauma shows up most in relationships because you get close to someone, and closeness and intimacy are scary. Yeah. They're scary for all human beings. Yeah. So
I'm curious with the work that you do, how often does body image come up in terms of a topic that women are wrestling with, in terms of experimenting with their capacity to feel pleasure in their body and allow their partners to play with them in the bedroom, things of that nature? Because I would imagine it does come up.
Oh, it comes up all of the time. Yeah. And this comes from the old way of thinking about ourselves and our sexuality as something that our partners consume and play with. Mm-hmm. And it's not for us. Right? Like our body has to be in tip-top shape so that it's consumed by someone else and we are desired for it. Yeah. And so much of the work that I do is changing that to how can you enjoy your body for yourself? Mm-hmm. How does this body bring you pleasure? And yes, you may have wrinkling skin or sagging stomach or other parts that don't look as well as they did when you were 20. And what kind of pleasure do they bring you? I've always had a belly and grew up with a lot of, or very little self-confidence around that. And there was a point in my journey where I discovered how pleasurable having my belly touched, and me even touching it, how pleasurable that is. Mm-hmm. And so I look at my belly so differently now. It's like this thing that has so much pleasure for me. And yeah, sure, I can look better in clothes, of course, but now there's so much love for that, mm-hmm. for this body part, because again, like I connected to it because it brings me pleasure. Yeah. And so this is what I invite women to do. And again, this is what I teach in my coaching and in the online program that I have, is start really small to connect to your body for your pleasure, like your skin. How does it feel for you? Can you feel the softness of your own skin? Could you feel the tingling in your own fingers when you touch your skin? And start to fall in love with it through touch, through sensuality, rather than pure looks.
Mm-hmm. I love the word you keep using, which is nutrition, right? Nourishment. This is a nutrient. Because if you think about it, nutrients are for us, right? Nutrients Absolutely. Are feeding us. They're not feeding our partner. Yes, they have their own nutrient profile, but nutrition is for us. And I love thinking of physical pleasure and intimacy as a vital nutrient for the human.
Yeah, absolutely. For our aliveness and that sense of color in our life, and of course our confidence and everything, and the way we show up in the world. I feel like for me that the change was huge when I started to own my sexuality. That I started, for example, I used to work in the corporate world, and I went up to my boss and during our annual reviews asked for a raise and asked for a promotion, and I was the only one in our group who got it. because no one else dared. It was in a way like a hard time for the business at that time, but I felt empowered to do it. It was the first time in my career. And it was also, again, I was the only person in a 40-person group at that time to get a promotion and a raise. And again, it was that feeling of unstoppableness. Like I can do it. I know I can ask, I can look in the eye of my boss, and I know I deserve it. I know it's important to me. And that's really what pleasure and sexuality for us does. It feeds us. And then we're, like I kind of, when you were talking about this, I thought of an analogy, as you're growing a tree, the tree needs nutrients so that it can bear fruit that other people can enjoy. And the same thing with sexuality. We as women need nutrients for us to blossom, and then we can bear fruit that our partners can enjoy. But without our own nutrients, it's a struggle.
Right. It's that sort of filling your cup before you're even able to sort of pour out to others. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And also, before we forget, I also wanted to circle back and mention the second piece of what someone can do if they're in a sexless marriage.
Okay, good.
Which is
yes,
something that they can do with a partner. And I love that you brought up that you had an episode of slowing down, because I have what are called slow practices that I teach couples. Okay. And for me, slow is SLO, which is sensual, lingering, orgasmic practices.
Oh, well, that sounds delicious. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, first and foremost, if you're in a sexless marriage, the thing is to talk to each other about it, to talk about it honestly and vulnerably, and say, we're missing, that something is missing. We had a connection before. This is missing. This is why it's really important. So the conversation, of course, that can be a whole podcast on itself, but that's the first piece. But what's important for couples in reconnecting sexually is starting to reconnect through these slow practices, meaning starting to rediscover each other, starting to learn how to be sensual with each other before they get to be sexual, to linger in that pleasure with each other, to explore each other's bodies, to gain a vocabulary to explain what they want. Mm-hmm. And that's where the slow practices come in, because you won't be able to have the kind of sex that you had in the beginning of a relationship, that kind of flanking to each other and flocking to each other rather, and tearing each other's clothes off. It needs to be a gradual reconnection. And whether it's slow practices or just connecting physically to each other in a more intentional way, that's the key to reconnecting and to building that sexual connection with each other.
Do you have a suggestion for entering that conversation in terms of maybe what a woman can do to sort of get clear with herself in terms of how to enter that conversation? Because I just have found so many times in my life, whenever I go into a really difficult conversation, something that, is difficult for me to talk about, taking the time to sort of ground myself and get clear for myself what I'm trying to communicate. Is that something that you speak to with your clients about, and sort of how to approach that conversation?
Absolutely. Well, and this is something that I teach people who come to my website before they can work with me, because I only work with couples where both partners are on board to create change. So a lot of women come to me with a situation that you just described, not knowing how to talk to their partners, not knowing how to bring them on board. And what I have on my website is a resource, and it's about how to talk to your partner to hire a sex coach. But it's really whether you're hiring a sex coach or you just want to rekindle the relationship, there's a really powerful worksheet on that page that takes you through, like you said, all the things that are going to help you get grounded in what's true for you. It's about looking at your desires and your fears and what really matters to you and why, because it's really important to convey that. It's not just like, I want to have sex and that's it. You want to convey what's actually happening in your heart, and maybe even name some resentments or some things that have accumulated over time as as you related to each other in a different way during that period.
So let's tell listeners where to find that, because I know people are going to ask where do they go specifically to get access to that?
Well, it's definitely on my website, irenefehr.com, and it's linked from somewhere, but I think I might have to just provide you the link if that's possible.
That's perfect. What we'll do is we'll get the link from you directly, and then we'll put it on the show notes page. No problem.
Perfect. Exactly.
Yes.
Yep.
How about the 5-part video series? It's 5 parts. Yes. Is it 5
Three.
parts? Oh, 3 parts. I don't know where I got
Close,
part.
Close enough.
Okay.
I know. 4 myths, 3 videos.
Right. That. So many numbers.
Yep. So that's easily accessible off of my website. It's called How to Want to Have Sex Again. It's a 3-video series. It's a training. Again, I get very geeky and sciencey in it, with lots of graphs. Provide important tools for women to start connecting to their pleasure. So there's a handout with 33 ideas on how to connect to your pleasure. That are actionable, that are small, but they kind of grow in size.
Okay. So we're building that capacity like you talked about earlier.
Exactly. So that's on the website, again, irenefehr.com. And there's also probably over 100 articles on there around connecting to yourself as a woman, building your libido, awakening your libido, and then also the different dynamics that are really important for women's libido in a long-term relationship.
Fantastic. And such great stuff on the blog. I spent some time perusing that, and there's lots of great stuff in there. So we will put the link to just kind of the application you spoke of and the video series and all the goods will be on the show notes page so people can easily access that. So in closing, if you could tell a woman one thing about sexual pleasure, intimacy, what would that thing be?
Oh,
I know it's such a difficult question.
Yeah. I think it's, what I mentioned earlier is when we get the nutrients that we need, when we take time, when we really build up what our bodies need to be really aroused, to be in that state of openness. And it's an alternate state of consciousness where, you don't care about your butt. You don't care about what's happening. You are just really connected to your body and flowing. It's just such a magical state. It's a state where it's a state of true surrender and letting go. And it's so nourishing. It is so enlivening. And I deeply want women to believe that they can have it because, so many women don't think that they are sexual or they can have sexual pleasure or they can enjoy sex. And that's just certainly not true. But every body is different, and it's about really getting to know yourself and what those nutrients are for you.
Right, because, which is so important, that it's not this like cookie cutter protocol. It's just really you basing your decisions off the best of what you know about yourself.
Exactly. And in every moment, because that can change too.
Of course.
So it's that connection to yourself that can get you there. But most importantly, it's, I want every woman to believe that she can have it.
Yeah.
That she can experience that.
And everyone listening knows I'm a huge fan of coaching, the coaching industry in general, but this is exactly why we work with coaches, is to learn how to believe that new things are possible for our life and start to walk that path. And you are certainly a wonderful expert for them to be referencing in regards to this conversation. So I'm so grateful that you made the time. Thank you for being here today. Is there anything else you want to share in closing?
Just my gratitude. Thank you so much for this rich conversation and amazing space to share this information, this knowledge. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Irene. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.